can follow this in more detail. But there's also been more reports about the extraordinary effectiveness of Russian electronic warfare systems. And one report, which I think must be authoritative since it must originate with Ukrainian sources, which has been republished by the British Royal United Services Institute, speaks of Ukraine losing 10,000 drones a month. 10,000 drones a month. Now, the vast bulk of these are being lost to Russian electronic warfare interference. The Russians are jamming the connections, causing these drones to fail. Now, the vast majority of these drones are small commercial drones being adapted by Ukraine for military use. To my mind, what this figure shows is the enormous extent to which this war is revolving around drones, the importance of drones in this war, but of course it also highlights again the effectiveness of Russian electronic warfare systems and the extent to which Ukraine is losing drones. Now, I have to say, 10,000 drones a month, I wonder to what extent Ukraine, even with the backing of the West, can go on supplying itself, producing drones, deploying drones on the battlefields. I would have thought this was ultimately an impossible challenge given the extent, the size of the losses. But anyway, I won't go into this in further detail. Now, so there's been this important piece of news about the Ukrainian offensive. I think we can, as I said, call this authoritative. South Korea is providing shells to Ukraine. The Russians have ramped up shell production, tank production, and are continuing to do so to enormous degrees. But anyway, that's going on. The other piece of news relates to the mystery of what's happened to the Ukrainian commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian military, General Zaluzhny. Now, he has been invisible for around 2 weeks now. I think the last confirmed sighting of him was on the 2nd of May. A short time ago, there was a YouTube clip which appeared to show him attending a science conference in Odessa, only it's been suggested that this particular clip actually isn't reliable either, and one shouldn't place any weight on him. Now, yesterday, the Russian media reported that the Russians have received information from Ukrainian sources that Zaluzhny was caught in shelling in Kherson region, that he suffered head injuries, that he was taken to Ukraine, to Kiev, that he received surgery for those injuries to his head, that he's survived, he's not dead, but that these injuries, compounding a pre-existing diabetes condition, mean that he's no longer capable of leading the Ukrainian military, and cannot therefore oversee this offensive. Now, the Russian intelligence chief, Sergei Narishkin, made a public statement about these rumors. He said that the Russians are indeed getting rumors about Zaluzhny's condition, but he said that they cannot be fully confirmed. There's no certainty that these are 100% reliable. And the secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, Danilov, has categorically denied them. He has said that Zaluzhny is well, that he actually turned up for work at the military headquarters yesterday, that these reports that are appearing in the Russian media are simply a Russian disinformation exercise. Well, up to this point, I have myself somewhat discounted these reports about Zaluzhny's condition. The reports we were getting yesterday seemed to me to be just that mite more substantive than some of the earlier reports we've seen and heard. And I'm starting to have doubts myself about Zaluzhny. He has been invisible for 2 weeks now. He was somebody who previously made a point of making himself very visible indeed, very different from Russian commanders like Gerasimov and Surovikin and the rest. And as I said, this long period, this long stretch of invisibility is unusual. Now, if this goes on for very much longer, then I'm going to start giving credence to these Russian reports, and I suspect people in Ukraine are going to start doing the same. We're not, I think, fully there yet, but we will see. Now, can I reiterate, however, that even if Zaluzhny is out of action, I don't expect it to interfere significantly with Ukrainian planning for this offensive. I don't expect that it will prevent Ukraine from launching this offensive. I suspect much of the planning is not being done in Ukraine anyway, but in NATO headquarters and other places. What it might do, if it is confirmed that Zaluzhny is severely injured and is no longer in effective command, what it might do is affect the morale of Ukrainian soldiers. And for all I know, that might be why, if he is indeed injured, if he is indeed wounded, the Ukrainians are concealing him. So what else has been happening? There was another rather curious attack by Ukraine on a Russian warship, which is patrolling the Turk Stream pipeline under the Black Sea. This warship, relatively far, it must be said, from the battle area, and not by any means a particularly powerful warship. It's not one of these warships. It's not an Admiral Makarov frigate or anything like that. Anyway, this particular warship was attacked by Ukraine's seaborne drones. The drones were spotted by the ship's air systems, and they were all destroyed. So we're told by the Russians, and in fact, there's no doubt at all about this. With heavy cannon firing at these drones from the ship. None of these drones, these seaborne drones, got through. All of them were destroyed. The ship is there, and I have to say that this attempt to attack a warship patrolling the Turk Stream pipeline, I suspect, is not going to please one particular person, who is, of course, President Erdogan of Turkey, for whom Turk Stream was a particular personal project. It's not an attack on the pipeline itself, but that warship was guarding the pipeline, and I can't imagine that Erdogan is going to be pleased at all. I get the sense, by the way, that Erdogan, who's now had the endorsement of the third place candidate in the Turkish election, and who looks increasingly certain of re-election on the 28th of May in the election runoff, I suspect that Erdogan has had it up to there with Ukraine. I think he's exasperated by Ukraine's behaviour over the grain extension, their refusal to acknowledge that there are concerns about blocks on Russian grain exports. And I think that this attack on a warship, a Russian warship, not engaged in the actual conflict, but protecting the Turk Stream pipeline, is not going to please him at all, particularly as this attack seems to have happened not far from the Bosphorus, in other words, from Turkish waters. So I think this was a misconceived operation altogether. I wonder, by the way, whether it wasn't in some way connected with the Turkish election, perhaps intending to create some kind of an incident in advance of the voting on the 28th of May, perhaps try to panic Erdogan into some sort of overreaction, or give the Turkish people a sense that if Erdogan was elected, their country might in some way be dragged into the war. Anyway, whatever the thinking was, the one thing I can say with certainty, with confidence, is that